Welcome to Cheap Controls. We make videos on things that we struggled with, hoping to help you so you don't. Consider subscribing and hitting that bell. In this video we're going to go over how to connect the ESP32 as a wireless access point. Then I'm going to connect to it with the computer and send it a command to turn on and off an LED. I'm going to do this in a step-by-step process, and down in the description you'll see a timing diagram for when each section starts so you can skip the parts you don't want to see. This is going to be a strange video for me because I'm not going to use the Next-Gen display for anything. I'm just going to go over the Wi-Fi setup, and then in next week's video I'm going to show how to find a list of available SSIDs and pick the one that you want to connect to. I'm going to start with this pretty much completely empty Arduino sketch. All I have is the serial begin 9600, and that's just so that I can send messages out for just to see what's going on. Now the first thing we're going to do is just add the Wi-Fi.h library. Now what I did find in researching this and learning about these ESP32s is there's lots of different ways to do this. So if you see anything in this and you're like, oh, I've done it a different way, you probably have. Now for our test, I'm going to call the SSID cctestnet, and then I'm going to make the password test. And if you'll notice, a lot of the sites that I went to, or the things when I was doing my research, they would use character arrays for the SSID and password. I'm just using straight strings, and that's because in the next video I want to show how to dynamically pick the SSID you want, and I'm even going to try to disconnect and reconnect to different SSIDs. And so in order to do that, it's just going to be easier just using strings. And then the third step is we're going to create the server itself, and we're going to use port 80 for that, and we're going to call the Wi-Fi server. I thought about this, and I probably should have given it a more unique name because it can be a little bit confusing, but we'll just be referring to it as the word server. Now in the setup, I'm going to do this two different ways. And the first way I'm going to do it, I'm just going to set up a soft AP as an SSID. I'm not going to put the password in it, so it's just going to be open. And you'll see that. I'll show you how I connect to it, and you'll see that I don't need a password. It should just connect. And then here's why I had that serial begin 9600. I want to see a little evidence that it's working. So we're going to print out the Wi-Fi, the IP address of the access point, and that's that Wi-Fi soft AP IP. What's interesting is I tried to do it up here and then add that Wi-Fi soft AP up here, but I had all sorts of errors doing that, and so it worked out better to separate it on the two lines. And then for the final step, you just begin the server. And then if you notice, we don't have anything in that loop. So now I'm going to upload this and we'll see what we get. And you can see up here we get an IP address, and that's the IP address of the access point, 192.168.4.1. And what I found is that is the default. So if you don't want to assign an IP address, that's what it gets. And then it hands out IP addresses in the 192.168.4 subnet of a 255.255.255.0 with that mask. So you only have an 8-bit network. Now before I connect, I'm going to show you the IP address of my current connection. And you can see here I'm on a different network. I've got the 192.168.1.15. But now I'm going to go over and I'm going to connect to the cctestnet. And you can see that it's right here. I'm not going to select it to connect automatically. I'm just going to hit connect, and you'll see that it doesn't ask me for any sort of credentials. Now that we're connected, I'll go back over to the command prompt and we'll get a new IP. And you can see now we're on the network, and we get 192.168.4.2. And the thing I like about it is you can ping the address and confirm that it's working. So by default, the ESP32 is, it will reply to a ping. And I feel like that'll come in handy going forward. I wasn't sure that it would. And now we're going to go back and change this so that we do have to put in a password. And it's as simple as using that Wi-Fi soft AP and then the SSID again and the password. And what I didn't say when I did the SSID alone is you do have to do the .c_string because that changes it into a character string. And so when you're using the Wi-Fi soft AP, you have to submit it with character strings. And now we've added the password. I'm going to upload this and you'll see that it's changed, and now it's going to ask me to input that test. And you can see that it's done, and I've got another, it wrote out the IP address again. When you upload to it, it reboots the ESP device, so you'll have to reconnect. And you can see that I'm connected back to the cheap controls, and that's because at reboot and I have this set to connect automatically. We'll go down to the CC testnet. I'm still not going to connect automatically on it until I know that it's working. It should ask me to enter that test. And there it is. And you can see it's test. In this case, I don't care if the PCs see it. And just to confirm, we'll do the IP config again. And we do have the 192.168.4.2. So everything is working just as it was, but now we have that test added, or the security added. So now there might be a time where you would want to set the IP address to a specific range or set a gateway or something, so I'm going to go through that next. If you want to configure the IP address, you can configure these three variables: the IP address IP, gateway, and the net mask. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the IP address to 10.15.22.1. And normally the gateway is the IP address of your AP. But in this case we're going to set it to something different. And I also want to note that you don't use the parentheses, you use the curly braces. The mask we're going to set at 255, 255, 255.0, just like the other one was. And then down in the setup, we're going to put this little delay in there for a second. I figure it's okay in the setup because we're only going to do it once. I'm not sure why I needed this, but I had trouble with the IP taking if I didn't have a short delay. It might only need to be 100, but I just didn't really care. I set it at a second. And then the command is wifi.softapconfig, and you set the IP, the gateway, and the network mask. I'm going to upload this now, and you'll see the change on the serial monitor, and then when I do the IP config. And there you can see we got the new IP address. And I made a mistake. You can see that we didn't get the proper IP here, but that's just because I didn't connect to the network. So you have to remember to connect to the network when you reboot the ESP. And now you can see that it works at 10.15.22.2. But what I did is I set up a different default gateway, and that's 23.1. But we're not going to be able to, if you know your IP addresses very well, you know that we won't be able to reach 23.1. So the first thing I'm doing is pinging 22.1, and now I'll change it to 23. And you can see that I'm not getting there. It's not on the same network, but you can set it to whatever you want, and I mainly wanted to show that you can break it. So you have to be careful because it's going to take what you put in there. It doesn't know that it's wrong. And now what we're going to do is we're going to get a character. We're going to try to show something in the serial monitor that's sent from the computer. So now is when we're going to get into the program or into the loop. And when you do this Wi-Fi client equals server available, it's looking to see if anyone out there or any device out there is trying to attach, and if it does, it's going to call it client. So in our case, it'll be the laptop. And then we're going to do something if there is a client. So if client, then we're going to do something. And in this case, all we're going to do is if we see a client connected to the ESP, we're just going to serial print something happened. And you can see that we got our IP address. I'm going to leave it the same, that 10.15.22.1. I've connected to it, the laptop is now connected to the wireless network, the CC test net, but you can see that we're not getting anything that says it's connected. So the only way that we see that there's a client is if it's trying to talk to it. But then it gets kind of confusing as to what kind of talking to it you're trying to do. So we're going to try and ping it, and we'll see if that gets any sort of a response. And you can see that it didn't. Now through the command prompt you can simulate like a browser going to it. Like if you were on your computer and you typed in google.com or something like that. And it's this curl get command. And you can see that when we sent this, it's like sending a kind of like a web browser request to the ESP. And you can see that we got a response. And if I do it again, I get another response. So that works. So when we have a connection and we're talking to it through a browser or sending it an official command, then we get a nice response from the ESP. But what would be nice is if we could get what it was that was sent to the ESP, and we're going to do that now. So while it's connected and while it has available, I'm going to call it bytes, just like reading the serial buffer on the Nexion display, we're going to read that byte in, that character C, and then we're going to write it out to the serial monitor. So we're going to collect it through the Wi-Fi, and then we're going to send it out. So now I have everything uploaded and ready to go. Here's our serial monitor. You can see we've got the IP address, and we're going to ping it again. And you can see we still don't get any sort of output. So the ping just really isn't a good test to do for this. Maybe there's another way. I'm still kind of learning this, so we'll see. But really what we would want to do is we want to send it some sort of a command to do something. Like later we're going to get to turning on and off the onboard LED. So we're going to send this curl request again, and we'll see what we get up here. And in the curl request we send test equals 0. And you can see we get test equals 0. Oh, I guess we got that question mark, test equals 0. And it also inserts this little /. So it's a get command, and then this is the data. And then we just have some information that it's an HTTP request, that we're going to this host address, that the agent is a curl request, and this must be the version of the curl that I have on my Windows machine. And I'm not sure what this is, unless it's just that /. But if we wanted to send more than test, like let's say we wanted to send it a string. So in this case we're going to send curl x get, and then test equals, this is a test from cheap controls. And you can see that it just got the this. So once it hit that space, so we get the get / question mark test equal this. And then there's something happens when it gets that space, it just stops, and then it goes back to the generic, it's an HTTP request, the host, the user agent curl, and the accept. So you must not be able to do this, the spaces, but there is a little trick if you're just doing some testing. So in this case we're going to do the curl-g, we're going to put the IP address in quotes, and then we'll put this -sign data, -sign URL and code, and then we'll put what we want to send in parentheses. I'm going to go up here and clear this, and then we'll send it. And now you can see something happened because we sent something there, and then it got the whole thing, but instead of putting spaces, it added these little plus signs. So that's kind of interesting too, but then after that everything is the same. So now we know we can send data to the ESP through the Wi-Fi and we can capture it. So now I'm going to add this data from browser. In the next one I use data from display, and this one I'm going to use data from browser, and I'm going to set it to empty. And then we're going to see if it's a new line. Because you notice after it did the HTTP, after every command it would go down to a new line. So if it's a new line, for right now I'm just putting in a filler of new line, we're going to print it. So after every line of text from the display, we're going to print the new line. So then what we're going to do is we're also going to clear the data from browser. If we didn't get the /n, then we're going to add that character that we received to the data from browser. So what we're going to do is we're going to build this string up until we see a new line, then we're going to erase that string. So instead of printing this new line, we're going to print the data from browser. So we're going to collect every character. We're going to serial write every character. We're also going to load it in the data from browser, and then when we get a new line, we're going to print the data from browser and then erase the data from browser. I'm going to show you this and hopefully it makes sense. So we have our IP address like we always get, and then I'm going to send this command to it, which should get a response. And it did, something happened, and then you can see we're getting a double of every line. And that's because we're collecting the characters and printing the characters, and then after we get a new line, during that time we were loading up that data from browser, and then we print it. And then we're printing this again, and then we're printing the data from browser, so we're printing it over and over and over. But the big part of this step is we're collecting that data into the data from browser. So now we can use that data from browser to do things. We're going to do that next. I want to comment out this line so we don't get double prints anymore. And then as we're loading data into that data from browser string, if we see that the string at that point ends with get/off, we're going to digital write pin 2 low. And if we see that from the browser ends with get/on, then we're going to digital write pin 2 high. So we're going to take the onboard LED and we're going to set it low if we see essentially off, and we're going to set it high if we see on. But we do have to go up to the setup and add that pin mode. So up here in the setup, I have to add that. And you can see the onboard LED is pin 2 and when it's set to an output. So now when we get the commands, we should be able to turn the LED on and off. And just for fun, we'll do this in the browser instead. So I have a browser here. I have the camera on top of the ESP device, and then we have our output up here. And what we have is the IP address 10.15.22.1, and then we have that /on. And you can see that the LED came on. The reason I did it this way was just to show you that you get a lot more information. So we get that get/on, and we're looking at it as it's getting the data. We don't wait until the end. So the second that it gets that ON, it will turn the light on. And the second that it gets the off, it'll turn it off. But then we also have a lot more information since we're using the browser. So it's sending more data to the ESP than that curl command did. And now we'll do the same thing with an off. And you can see that it turned it off. So this is a way you can control the LED from the browser. The next video I'm going to have is I'm going to have the Nexion display connected to the ESP, and you'll be able to select dynamically the SSID that you want. So the process is fairly simple and straightforward. You have to include the Wi-Fi library, and then you create your own SSID and password. It can be pretty much whatever you want. The Wi-Fi server, you have to start it or create it. And then if you want to set the IP address, you can. I don't really see the reason for it unless you had multiple networks. And then you just create it in a way with this Wi-Fi soft AP and the SSID and the password. And then I do a little delay in there before I set the IP gateway and network mask. Now, if you weren't doing that, I wouldn't need that delay. And then I print out the IP address, and then I start my server. Now down here in the loop, we're just seeing if there is a client. We're checking to see if anyone's wanting to attach. And if it does, and it sends some sort of a request, then we're going to print out something happened. And then we're going to use this data from browser variable. And if a client is connected and has sent anything to the ESP, we're going to collect that in our data from browser right down here. If we get a new line, we're going to print the data from browser and we're going to clear it. And then down here I just check that data from browser, and the second I get a get/off or a get/on, I execute something. In this case I turn the onboard LED on or off. I'm hoping this leads to some fun videos. So I'm really enjoying making these. I did take a little bit of a break so I could learn all this, and just to take a week off to spend with my nephew doing some engineering projects, and that was a lot of fun too. Well, that's about it for this video. If you like what you saw, consider giving me a thumbs up, and also consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.